الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Last week we had stopped, I think, abruptly because of the time of prayer had came in, and we didn't quite finish one of the ayah. I believe it was ayah 66. So we'll start there, inshallah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. So ayah number 66. As we spoke about the response of Yaqub alayhi salam to his sons. His sons had requested Yaqub alayhi salam to have Binyamin. Okay. Bismillah. So ayah number 66. Ayah number 66. We were speaking about Yaqub alayhi salam giving his response to his sons. When the sons requested that they take Binyamin with them a second time, right? A second journey back to Egypt so that he can get his rations, or that he can get his measures of the trade, right? Because Yaqub alayhi salam says, if you don't bring your other brother, you won't even come close to me. You won't have this deal with me, right? So they were so convinced, based off of several things that we mentioned last week. They were so convinced that they say, "Sanurawidu abana." We will definitely entice, right? The same word was used as seducing. We will surely entice our father to convince him that we can bring Binyamin, right? So that's where we left off. Yaqub alayhi salam, he says, "A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Qala lan ursilahu ma'akum hatta tu'tuni mawthiqan min Allahi la ta'tunnani bih." Right? So he says, Yaqub alayhi salam says, lan ursilahu. I will not, so there's a difference between la in Arabic and lan. So la means it's okay, it's not it may possibly happen, right? But if you say lan in Arabic, meaning it will never happen, right? So it's an emphasis on the fact that he won't do it, except for what? Hatta tu'tuni mawthiqan min Allah, until you give me a solemn oath by Allah, once you swear to me, right? And he says, لَتَأْتُنَّنِي بِهِ إِلَّا أَن يُحَاطَ بِكُمْ. Now the last portion of this response is what I want to focus on. So he says, give me an oath, all 10 of you guys, give me an oath, swear to Allah that you will come back with him. لَتَأْتُنَّنِي بِهِ. You will for sure, there's an emphasis on the shadda here. لَتَأْتُنَّنِي بِهِ. You will for surely come back with him. You bring him back to me. Right? This is where we ended last week. Yaqub alayhi salam. It could have been logical. It could have been enough if Yaqub alayhi salam stopped there. Right? Like, as a father, like, you've already done something to your other brother, and now you're asking for the younger brother? Like, what do you want to do with him now? Right? As a father, you would be like, these guys, you better bring him back or else there's punishment. Right? If Yaqub alayhi salam says, swear by Allah you bring him back, and that's all, that's it, period. It would have been kind of logical as a regular response from a father. especially if he's angry, correct? Yaqub alayhi salam, he doesn't stop there, subhanAllah. When I came across this ayah, it reminded me of what he did in the past as well, Yaqub alayhi salam. So he says, إِلَّا أَيُّحَاطَ بِكُمْ. He says, you will bring him back, except if you are like overpowered. Halta means like surrounded. You can't do anything, right? So if you, for example, if you're in a war and you are down to the last 10 people in your army, yeah, and you're surrounded by 1,000 army men from the opposition, what's going to happen? It's nearly impossible for you to turn the tables at that point, right? For every one person, you're fighting 10 people, right? So ayyuhal tabikum, meaning you're completely surrounded and it's out of your control. What does that mean? Yaqub alayhi salam here, he's telling his sons that you come back with him, except I'll give you an excuse. You can use this excuse if something were to happen to Binyamin and is out of your control. Then I understand. That's what he's saying here. Yaqub alayhi salam, after everything that happened, wallahi, it reminds you about what he did the first time. What did he do the first time? Remember when he gave the excuse, he says, I'm afraid that if Yusuf goes with you, that what's going to happen to him? That the wolf might come and eat him. Why did he say that? What did we mention? We said that because Yaqub alayhi salam, he was cognitive and he was mindful of their feelings, right? He gave them an excuse to use, because if he would have said, I don't want Yusuf to go with you guys because something might happen, right? The brothers, they would have thought, what, our dad doesn't trust us? What's wrong with him? We're men. We're more than capable of taking care of Yusuf. But no, he didn't say that. He said, I'm afraid that another thing that might cause him harm and not you guys. Does that make sense? He was now this is proof and evidence to me that Yaqub alayhi salam, remember we said, although he loved Yusuf more, but wallahi, just analyzing his words proves to me that he was fair to every single one of his sons. Does that make sense? Yes, he can't control his heart when it came to one son. But when it came to his actions, this is what he shows us. And is more amazing that he is in a state of high emotions. It's logical for him to be angry right now. Because how dare the 10 sons come back to the father and ask the exact same thing with Binyamin? The audacity that they had to do that. Does that make sense? And the response of Yaqub is something that we should follow. This is our prophet. This is the prophet that Allah wanted us to follow as an example. So, Yaqub alayhi salam, he says, you for sure bring him back, except if it's out of your control. Except if something happens and you're surrounded, you halta, and you can't. It's just. So let's just say the brothers, indeed their intentions were to get rid of Binyamin also. Let's just change the story a little bit, right? If they wanted to do that, and they heard the father saying, except if we were surrounded, they would have gone, get rid of Binyamin somehow, however they planned to, and they come back to their father, crying again, right? And saying, oh dad, a wolf ate Yusuf, but this time we were surrounded, right? Now Binyamin is gone, is out of our control. They could have easily done that. So we see in the case of Yaqub alayhi salam, I'm just at awe at how he dealt with the situation. It to me, I get lost in my words to explain who our prophet is. This is the best I can do. And wallahi, I wish I had more to my vocabulary to be able to explain to you the true reality of the examples that Allah chose for us. It's not enough. It's not enough for me to sit here and explain to you who Yaqub is. So imagine if we had the opportunity to meet Yaqub alayhi salam, to meet Yusuf alayhi salam, to meet our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, wouldn't you take the opportunity? Guess what? The Quran that you're holding, that's the opportunity. That's the opportunity that Allah gave us. How can we, after knowing who our prophets are, how can we reject it? How can we even put it down for a second? Do you understand? How dare us pick up the Quran once a year during Ramadan and the rest of the months is on the shelf? How dare us? Allah put the Quran between your own hands, yet you don't pick it up. And wallahi, I'm guilty of it as well. May Allah forgive us. He gave us the most powerful, He gave us the opportunity to be amongst the most powerful nation, the most powerful ummah. And we're sitting here relaxed. We're sitting here, we don't care. How can we hold the mantle that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ gave us and we put it down? So he gives his sons an excuse to use. However, the previous ayah, the previous two ayahs, I believe, Yaqub alayhi salam, he was adamant. He was adamant to say that Binyamin is not going with you. Right? Remember he said that? He says, no way. Do you want to do to him as you did to the other brother? Remember, he didn't mention the name Yusuf, remember? Because why? Yaqub alayhi salam didn't want to mention the name Yusuf because he was mindful of their feelings, of the feelings of the brothers. Right? He says, do you want to do to Binyamin what you did to the other brother? Right? He was adamant. He's like, no, this is not going to happen. What changed here? Why did Yaqub alayhi salam flipped 100%? Before he said no. Now he says, I will let him go until you give me an oath that you bring him back. Right? What changed? The only thing that changed between the previous two ayahs until now was the merchandise that they found in the caravan. That was the only thing that changed. Right? Okay. Now I'm trying to prove the genius and the intelligence of Yusuf alayhi salam. And this is completely my opinion. But I feel as if Yusuf alayhi salam, he was able to kind of analyze the situation, and he came up with a plan to be able to convince his father without even seeing him, without even saying a word, without even hinting the fact that he was Yusuf. Right? So yeah, Yusuf alayhi salam, he had to come up with an idea to be able to convince Yaqub alayhi salam, his father, to allow Binyamin to allow Binyamin to go with his brothers. Yusuf had to do that. How can you possibly do that? You know your father don't trust the brothers. You know that. And I'll try to explain. There's a point to note that Yusuf alayhi salam knew that Yaqub didn't trust his brothers. Right? Because, I'll tell you now, because the first time they came to Egypt, was Binyamin with them? Binyamin was not with them. So that gave a hint to Yusuf alayhi salam that the brothers were still kind of like, they weren't any better, if that makes sense. Right? So if you see your brothers again, you're like, where's Binyamin? Like, why didn't Binyamin come? My dad must have not allowed him. So that means they're still the way they are before. Does that make sense? Right? So Yusuf alayhi salam, the way he knew that if his dad saw the merchandise, it would have said that the brothers weren't lying. The proof is the merchandise. Right? So that was what convinced Yaqub alayhi salam. And this is my opinion. Wallahu ta'ala alam. But that's the only variable that changed within these 3 ayahs. That's the only thing that changed. And that tells me that Yusuf alayhi salam, this was his plan all along. This was his plan to convince his father to allow Binyamin to go. Does that make sense? So everything is going according to Yusuf's plan. Amazing. SubhanAllah. This is how Yusuf alayhi salam was. Intelligence. Right? Okay. A few more points to mention about kind of the emotions and the feeling of Yaqub alayhi salam, right? As we proved, Yaqub alayhi salam being the loving father that he is, he didn't dismiss the 10 sons. He didn't do that. He could have easily said, don't talk to me anymore. Instead, he communicated to them. It shows you he was able to control his emotions. Now, the thing that is easy to kind of just glance over is that he is talking to 10 sons, right? Now, the significance of talking to more people than just one person is that you can have just a single conversation, and then that'll be all, So the father, Yaqub alayhi salam, he's talking to every single one of them, right? And then it's easy to glance over because it's not always reminding us that he's talking to 10 sons, right? Now, emotions come into play here because he may have a closeness to one of the sons, maybe through, let's just say, football, for example, right? This kid likes football, the father likes to play with him with football. Another one is he likes to, hunting or something like that, right? So he has these different connections to each one of his sons. So when all of your sons come to you, begging you, you start to like as a father, you have like these different connections to every single one of your sons, and you feel, I'm losing my words. You have this leniency towards every single one of them in a different way, right? So it's just more convincing when your sons are begging you, like, Dad, we have to do this. Like, if we're not going to do this, we won't survive. Like, you have to understand, we only want good. This is what we want for our family. Don't you see our kids, your grandchildren, right? Don't you see all our wives? We're struggling. This is what they're going through because we know that they're poor. And it's all of these important notes is easy just to glance over. But if we stop to think, Yaqub alayhi salam, he's just a human being. And he's dealing with his own sons. Right? When you're dealing with your own sons, your heart just, it wants to melt because they're begging you. Right? So it's kind of like a fight between being stern and trying to teach them a lesson and just being more lenient to them. Right? So we continue to the next ayah. Ayah number 67, inshallah. Now, I think we may end with this ayah because there's a lot to cover. So bismillah. Now, Yaqub alayhi salam is convinced. He sees the evidence. He sees the merchandise. He sees that, the minister had returned their items, showing that this minister, whoever he is a really good person. And if he knows our situation, he may help us. Right? That's the evidence that he has in front of him, and as well as the emotional connections that he had with his sons. So all in all, he's like, at this point, I have to do something to allow my family to survive, right? So Yaqub alayhi salam, he says, وَقَالَ يَا بَنِيَّ لَا تَدْخُلُوا مِنْ بَابٍ وَاحِدٍ وَدَخُلُوا مِنْ أَبْوَابٍ مُتَفَرِّقَةٍ. Right, so Yaqub alayhi salam, he takes this opportunity, subhanAllah, even being emotional, or even like anger perhaps, right? Sad, stress, reminiscing about Yusuf alayhi salam, right? Worrying about Binyamin and what may happen to him. What does he do? He gives his sons advice. Now, if you think about the nature of advice, right? Would you give advice to somebody who you hate? Would you give advice to somebody who you hate? Rarely. Would you give advice to somebody who did something wrong to you? Usually not. Maybe, right? If you really, I don't know, it's debatable, right? Now, would you give advice to your own sons who, let's just say, killed your other son? It's very difficult to just look at your son in the face. It brings you like very sad memories, right? Even if you're a good person, it chokes you up, and you're like, what? I just can't deal with this right now. It's just too much. You're asking me for Binyamin. You're asking me for this. I'm remembering Yusuf now. And now all of you are gonna leave. I'm not gonna have any sons with me. If all of you leave, nobody's gonna be with me anymore. Right? Yet he stops and he gives his sons advice. That is, to me, that's extraordinary. How can you do that? Fadl.
I mean, no, he's still a prophet. It's not like a normal human being. That's my thought, my thinking. Don't quote me in this. And it's always the nature of prophets, to give the advice no matter what.
MashaAllah.
Yeah, with the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
No, MashaAllah.
Yeah, I mean, that's my thinking. I could be wrong.
You should be a good example for the rest of the community.
طبعا, hey.
I mean, even like sometimes we get harmed or their family members killed by somebody from outside.
Yes.
Okay. Not their even family. And when we see that killing, we just forgive for the sake of Allah.
Yeah, wallahi, I completely agree with you.
Yeah, but I mean, it is very emotional.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, I mean, like, again, like, they have elements of, like, obviously Allah kind of like guides them, and Allah guides them so that they can set an example for us, for the nations of now, right? And wallahi, you're right, I completely agree, is that Yusuf alayhi salam, being the person who he is as a prophet, you always want good for people. In fact, I'm trying to gather. I'm on this like long-term project that I'm trying to prove. I'm trying to prove that our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his love and the way he loves, is unmatched. Unmatched. There is nobody on the face of this earth, in the past or in the future, that can ever love the way our Prophet Muhammad ﷺ loves. The way he loves people, the way he loves his family, the way he loves in general, and how he does it, nobody can ever come close to the way he, even I would argue that a mother loving her child is not even matching the way the Prophet ﷺ loves. And that's just my opinion. I'm still kind of like in the process of gathering my information, but that's something that I'm working on. But agreed, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He guides the prophets to do what's correct. And in this case, it's qadrullah, right? So Yaqub alayhi salam, he gives advice. He says, Ya bunayya. Now I'm going to take this and kind of explain it in three parts. He says, Ya bunayya, O my sons. La tadkhulu min babin wahid. Do not enter, when you go back, don't enter in one gate. Rather, enter in multiple gates. Mutafarriqah, meaning like gates that are spread out of the city. Like you have the eastern gate, western gate, gate of Malik Fahad, for example, right? Like you have these different gates to enter the city. And then he says, وَمَا أُغْنِي عَنْكُمْ مِنَ اللَّهِ شَيْءٍ مِنَ اللَّهِ شَيْءٍ إِنِ الْحُكْمُ إِلَّا لِلَّهِ عَلَيْهِ تَوَكَّلْتُ وَعَلَيْهِ فَلْيَتَوَكَّلِ الْمُتَوَكِّلُونَ. So we'll try. I'll try to break it up, inshallah. So he calls his sons. He says, "Oh son," right? He gives them advice to enter the city in multiple gates, in different gates. And then he says, I cannot help you against what has already been destined for you. Right? So he used the word ughni. Ughni comes from the word ghani, meaning if you translate it to English, it means rich. In fact, it actually also means independent from something. Like you have enough so that you don't have to rely on something else. That's what ghani means, right? Like if you say, الرجل غني عن الناس. A man, he's rich, or he's self-sufficient, and he doesn't need the help from others. That's what rich means, right? So like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, his name is Al-Ghani. He's self-sufficient. He doesn't need anything from anybody. Right? He's the most powerful. He doesn't need our help. He doesn't need sleep. He doesn't need anything. He's Al-Ghani. Right? So it has this kind of like close meaning to like, being independent. Right? So Yaqub alayhi salam, he's giving them advice. He's saying that even if you follow my advice, even if you do whatever I tell you to do, it won't be, how would I say it? You still need the help from Allah. لا يغني عنكم من الله شيء. Like, if Allah destined something for you, even if you take precautions, if you're about to get into an accident, even if you have like snow tires on, even you take every precaution, you take the safest road, but if Allah wrote that you're going to be in an accident, it's going to happen. No matter what you do. This is what he's saying to his sons. Even if you enter from multiple gates. Now there's a reason for that. A lot of the scholars mention that the reason why Yaqub alayhi salam is telling his sons to enter from different gates is because he's afraid of al-ain, the evil eye. Because remember, this is the second trip. They're going back again. And remember where they went before? They went straight to the palace of Yusuf. It's like, they're having, special accommodations. They're allowed straight into the palace of the king. Like, what's going on here? So if they come back, right? They left already with the full load. Now when people seeing like, oh, these same guys? So there's a psychological thing that human beings have. Especially with boys. If you see a father and behind him are 10 boys, that image itself it gives like a strong image. Does that make sense? Right? It's just natural. And I've experienced this before. I was driving on MOK for Jum'ah, I believe. Yes, for Jum'ah. And I seen a Afghani brother. And the reason why I know he's Afghani because he was wearing the Afghani outfit, right? I can't remember exactly, 3 or 4 sons with him. Just the image. It strikes you as if that's a strong image, That's just human reality. And now if you see girls, it's kind of like, oh, mashallah, it's like, he has a calming kind of like feeling that you get. But if it's men, it gives you a sense of like proudness, right? And back in the days, that's how it was. If you had a family with a lot of men, a lot of boys, you know that's going to be a strong family. Right? Yeah. Exactly, right? Yeah, so the point I'm getting to is that when they're entering, all of them entering in one gate, it strikes the people of the city. Another opinion of the scholars, they mentioned that the brothers of Yusuf, they were also handsome. They were well built. They were strong. So that in itself, it gives you like some people might be even jealous, right? So the scholars had mentioned that the reason why Yaqub alayhi salam advised them to enter from different gates is to avoid al-ain, the evil eye, right? So he says, Yaqub alayhi salam says, وَمَا أُغْنِي عَنْكُم مِّنَ اللَّهِ شَيْءٍ. Like, you won't be, I can't protect you. Even if I give you the best plan ever, if Allah wants it for you, it's going to happen. But he started with what? He didn't start with that. He started with advice first so that they can follow it. And then to get them to understand al-qadr, the plan of Allah, it will happen even if you follow my advice. And then he says, وَعَلَيْهِ تَوَكَّلْتُ. After that, every single time Yaqub speaks, this is what I notice. Every single time, he takes the opportunity to give an advice, and then he ties it to Allah every single time. He connects the advice to Allah. Every time. So what is he's teaching his sons that in reality, you can do whatever you want. You can try your best. But if Allah wants it to be, it'll happen. So what's the lesson here? وَعَلَيْهِ تَوَكَّلْتُ. And to him I put all of my trust. I put my trust with all 10 of you guys. I put my trust with Binyamin. I put my trust even with Yusuf. Because it's out of my hand. Remember he says, إِلَّا أَيُّحَاطَ بِكُمْ. If you're overpowered, then what can you do? وَعَلَيْهِ تَوَكَّلْتُ. To Allah, we put our trust completely. But the thing is here is that we try our best. We plan. We do whatever we can. We make promises. We make oaths. But even after all of that, even every single step that you take, what do you do at the end? وَعَلَيْهِ تَوَكَّلْتُ. وَعَلَيْهِ تَوَكَّلْتُ. This is the ending of his advice. فَلْيَتَوَكَّلِ الْمُتَوَكِّلُونَ. And then he says, those who, so the explanation of وَعَلَيْهِ فَلْيَتَوَكَّلِ الْمُتَوَكِّلُونَ, in him should all those who have faith put their trust. So meaning, whoever wants to rely on something, they should rely on Allah other than, anything else. Right? Like you don't rely on your job to give you money. You have that, you plan for it, this is what you do, but in reality, Allah is the one that provides for you. Because tomorrow, you could have a stroke and then you're in the hospital. And then you're out of a job. They're not going to pay you. Right? This is what it means by you take your precautions. You do what you can. And then at the end, you put your trust in Allah. So those who have faith, those of you who believes in Allah, should put their trust in Allah only. Right? So I want to break down the method that Yaqub alayhi salam used. First, he used loving attributes. That's the first thing. Now I want to pay attention to his method because it is so familiar to something that we explained before. Yaqub alayhi salam, he says, Ya bunayya. When you talk to your sons, do you ever say, oh my son? No, you be like, like Abdullah or Muhammad. go clean your room, right? You won't say, oh my son, go clean your room, right? You don't, it's not, does that make sense?
Doesn't match.
Right? It doesn't match, exactly, right? So, Yaqub alayhi salam, he starts with saying, oh my son. Even though they're trying to do something to, well, in Yaqub's mind, he's like, now what you want to do to my son, right? Even though he's like, he feels this contention, he still calls them, you're still my son. No matter what you do. The worst thing you did, even though you're still my sons, I still love you. Ya baniya, right? For jama', for multiple people. Ya baniya. And then he gives caring advice. So that's number 2. He gives caring advice. لا تدخلوا من باب واحد. And then he says, وعليه توكلت. When he's saying this, I put my trust on Allah. He's trying to give them a message also that you guys should also put your trust in Allah. Because the second round that's coming, when you're going back, is going to be a dangerous one. Right? Because when you teach somebody, you try to teach them with example. وَعَلَيْهِ تَوَكَّلْتُ. He says to at the end, meaning I put my trust in Allah. I'm doing it. So you should follow that advice, right? So he gives them caring advice. And number three, he's explaining, whoever has faith, whoever has iman, whoever believes in Allah, you should put your trust in Allah. You see how that goes? Now, this is very familiar with Yusuf alayhi salam when he was in prison. He says, Ya sahibi as-sijn, O my partner in prison, O my fellow inmate, we're the same, you and I. I'm not better than you, you're not better, we're the same. O my fellow inmate, we're both here together. And then what did he say? He used that opportunity to give da'wah. Yeah? He gave the opportunity to give da'wah. And the way he did it was it was direct, but it was so caring. Right? And then he explained the dream. It's such an uncanny type of... So the further we get, I'll give you kind of like a glimpse of what's to come, right? Yusuf alayhi salam, the way he kind of like carries himself, and then we also follow Yusuf's story, and we also follow Yaqub's kind of like story as well. They are so similar. And when did they split up? When he was a young boy. And even though he wasn't really raised by his father, they are so similar. The way they carry themselves, the way they give advice, the way they love people, they care about people. It's such like you know how like father, like son is usually the case, because the father and the son is always together. The son is always watching what the father does, right? And how he talks and how he laughs. But in the case of Yusuf, he wasn't even with his father. And even though he carried his father's kind of like attributes, it's the strangest thing. We will see that later on when we keep going, when we keep going on into the story, we're going to see that like uncanny resemblance of how they carry themselves and how they dealt with things, right? So the next ayah is actually there's a lot of explanation as well, because now they've taken that journey with Binyamin. Now they're on their way to Egypt. The next ayah number 68, they've entered Egypt. And they've entered Egypt and they listened to the advice of their father. Meaning, they entered from different gates. So, وَلَمَّا دَخَلُوا مِنْ حَيْثُ أَمَرَهُمْ أَبُوهُمْ. When they entered according to their father's advice, مَا كَانَ يُغْنِي عَنْهُمْ مِنَ اللَّهِ شَيْءٍ. Allah repeats what Yaqub alayhi salam said. And then he says, it did not avail them in the least against the will of Allah. Yes, they took the precautions. Yes, they did whatever they did according to the plan of the father. But Allah is telling us here, even though they took they followed the plan, it didn't free them from what Allah planned. Their plan will never overtake the plan of Allah, right? إلا حاجة في نفس يعقوب قضاها. Allah explains to us here. It says, it was but a need of Yaqub alayhi salam, his inner self which we discharged. Meaning, Yusuf alayhi salam gave that advice because he wanted good for his sons. Yaqub. Oh, did I say Yusuf? Yaqub alayhi salam he loved his sons, so he wanted to give them advice so that they can be somewhat protected, or to be at least protected from the things that Yaqub can't control, right? Otherwise he'll go with them and then but he can't. He's too old. He can't make that journey. So instead he gives them advice, and then that was just from himself. But it doesn't change the qadr of Allah, right? And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about Yaqub, إِنَّهُ لَذُو عِلْمٍ. Allah is telling us that Yaqub alayhi salam, he's dhu ilm. He's the holder of wisdom. He has knowledge. Allah is telling us that Yaqub alayhi salam, he's intelligent as well. Dhu ilm, like he's the holder of knowledge, of wisdom. Right? Lima allamnahu. But the thing here is that Allah is telling us he's knowledgeable, but only from the knowledge that we gave him. Yes, you can be knowledgeable. You can have a degree. You can be so intelligent that you can possibly come up with a plan to build an empire, like Tesla, for example. But if you don't associate your knowledge with Allah, that's not knowledge. Allah can easily take it just like that, with an earthquake, for example. So the true knowledge, Allah is telling us here, lima allamnahu, what we taught him, not what he got from himself, right? وَلَكِنَّ أَكْثَرَ النَّاسِ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. And indeed, surely, a lot of people, they don't understand this. They don't know this. They associate their knowledge and their success and their jobs and their homes and everything that they own, they associate it with themselves. That's arrogance. Because indeed, Allah is the one that provides for us everything, even our knowledge and what we know. So we'll stop there, inshallah. Next week we'll focus more on this ayah, and then there's a lot more to actually talk about when we're on ayah number 68. I just gave you kind of like a brief translation. So we'll stop there, inshallah. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.